Welcome to this episode of our podcast, I Like Being a Kid. If you're new to this, we are with the Rapides Parish Library. My name is Karla Kirby.
And my name is Craig Jones. The reason why we call it I Like Being a Kid is in honor of Mr. Brian and Miss Terry Kinder out of Little Rock, Arkansas.
Hey, Brian and Terry.
Yeah, hey. And we basically talk about children's authors. We cover a picture book author and a
chapter book author.
Once a month, yep. And this month we're going to be talking about Chris Van Allsburg and Beverly Cleary. And I'm going to be talking about Chris Van Allsburg, and Karla's going to be leading it with Beverly Cleary. Starting right off the bat, you want me to start with Chris Van Allsburg?
Yeah, I think so. This is a good one, I think, because these are two classics.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I grew up, I think that, may I first state, that none of the authors we cover are authors that we dislike. You know, we love every single author for different reasons. That being said, Chris Van Allsburg was like the first author that I ever really fell in love with. And it was ironically because of Polar Express, not ironically, but it was because of Polar Express, as so many kids do fall in love with Polar Express, you know?
I mean, maybe his most well-known, I would assume. Maybe.
Either that or Jumanji.
Oh, Jumanji,
yeah.
You know, people still to this day, I don't know how many years old it is, but there's still Polar Express parties every year. I mean, like, it has, you know, stayed the course.
Yeah, I remember watching it, going on a school field trip to watch Polar Express. That might date me a little bit. But watching Polar Express, and I enjoyed it. That whole Uncanny Valley thing never really bothered me. But I certainly understand why it would other people.
Sure.
But Chris Van Allsburg grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and he always grew up unsure of what he wanted to do. And whenever basically like the equivalent of a college advisor came to talk to all of his graduating class, he was like, I don't really know what I want to do. And he was looking at the list and he saw A and D. And the advisor was like, oh yeah, I think it's art and design, but it might have been like art and development or something like that. But he said, yeah, that's our art program. And he took a beat and he was like, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. So it was very much just a whim. His path to becoming a children's author was just a series of sort of falling upstairs, you know, like a series of happy coincidences that got him to the fame that he's in now, because that was the first step that he even got in art and design in the first place. And whenever he got there, another point is that he started studying sculpture instead of illustrations, because he was always really good with his hands. Like, his parents talked about him modeling, like making like ship models at like age 8.
Oh.
Yeah. So he had always been really good at building things with his hands. And whenever he graduated, he started working in a studio, but the studio became extremely cold in the winter because he's always been a northerner. And the maintenance man would turn off the heat for the evening, which was the time when he would work on his things. So he actually turned to illustrating as a hobby. And I've looked at some of his sculptures. They are very interesting. Oftentimes they sort of freeze moments in time, like a train wreck or a coffee spilling over, or like a bullet going through a cone. They're all really interesting.
See, now I want to look up his sculpture, because I love his art. I mean, I really like his writing too, but I love his art so much.
Yeah, there is a sort of biographical article by David Macaulay, the children's author for Cathedral and Castle, The Way Things Work, Black and White, because he's actually a family friend of theirs, and it sort of connects his like personality with the art and sculptures that are like around his house. It's really interesting because it's really giving a personality based on the art that he has made.
Is there anywhere online that I can see his home? Because I bet it's fascinating.
I have not found, but also I've never really like looked for a picture of his home.
I'm just that it's so cool.
Yeah, and like I said, his sculptures are really interesting. And he actually, David Macaulay, the author that I was telling you about, actually sort of got him into children's writing. His wife basically smuggled out some illustrations with his permission, so it was very poor smuggling. But gave them to David, and David gave them to a publisher. And the publisher talked to Chris and gave some examples of books that he might be interested, or that the publishing company were interested in him illustrating for. And they just weren't stories that really interested him. So the publisher was like, well, have you thought about writing your own stories? And Chris had never really thought of that. But eventually he did one of the illustrations for his first book, The Garden of Abdul Ghazazi, which I have been mispronouncing his name for so long because I've called it Ghazazi, but he actually named it Ghazazi because he originally wrote the book in couplets and he wanted to rhyme it with crazy. But he wrote The Garden of Abdul Ghazazi, and like one of the illustrations in here is apparently like one of his first illustrations. I think he said in an interview the third one, but don't hold me to that. So that is insane to me. Just how good, like it is. He was starting off. It was probably the 8th or 9th. I actually found that in my notes, so not the 3rd. Don't listen to me. But the Bull Terrier, and this is another aspect that I found really interesting of his works. The Bull Terrier that is in this book, Fritz, if you probably can't see it, but if you have the book closer to you, you can see Fritz right there on the cover.
You can also check it out from the library.
Certainly. Fritz appears in all of his other books.
Oh, like it's an Easter egg kind of situation. Nice.
Yeah.
I love that.
In some of the books, it's a like sock puppet. In some of the books, it's just a tail. In other books, it's like different kitchen ornaments. I don't want to spoil where Fritz is in all the books in case you want to.
I do love something with an Easter egg that I have to look for.
I really do too. That made me fall in love with Chris Van Allsburg even more.
I mean, we are Swifties, so we love an Easter egg. Sorry, Craig's a closeted. Not anymore. Anyway.
The Fritz was actually based on a dog that was his brother-in-law's. Mm-hmm. And he was a Bull Terrier, and he was a very animated dog, according to Chris. And he lost a territory fight with a vehicle. It was like the words that he uses. Yeah, it was very, I guess, interesting wording.
It is.
But he honored the name of the dog was Winston. And he honored Winston by making him Fritz and Abdul Ghazazi. And because Abdul Ghazazi became so popular, I mean, he won a Caldecott medal, or he got a Caldecott honor for his first book that he had ever made. So, of course, he honored Winston in all of his other books by putting in Fritz. It became common for readers to see Fritz in all of his books, and just talking about some of his other books, The Z Was Zapped. Have you ever read this before? It is
fantastic.
It's an alphabet book, but
it's a good alphabet book. Sorry, there's some out there that aren't great. That's a good one.
Yeah, because he focuses not necessarily on nouns, but on verbs and making it action so that kids can have a better time associating letters with other words that they might not necessarily, because I mean, who hasn't heard A for apple?
Right.
You know, but this one is like the Z was zapped, the B was bitten, and different things like that. One of my favorite ones, if I can reach it, is The Bad Day at Riverbend. This is such an interesting book because, spoiler alert, so you might want to skip the next like 20 seconds, but if you don't want to get spoiled for it, but at the end of the book, it is revealed that the Riverbend takes place in a children's coloring book. And so all of the scribbles that you see are actually scribbles that the kid colored. And I think my 20 seconds are up. So that's about Bad Day at Riverbend.
It's been out long enough that spoilers are okay.
Sure, fair. But I just don't want to, because whenever I read it, I was astounded at like that twist.
I love a plot twist I don't see coming.
Indeed. He also wrote about the first woman, or the first person, who ever went over Niagara Falls. Oh. And she put a whole lot of pillows in a barrel, and this is a biography that he wrote, and used the pillows to sort of cushion her fall. This is a really interesting book. I've never
read that one.
Yeah, it became my goal in, I think, 2020 to read all of Chris Van Allsburg's works, and I got all of them done but like one, which I have read this year. So The Queen of the Falls, I definitely like. Bad Day at Riverbend, Queen of the Falls, and The Z Was Zapped are all really interesting. Of course, everyone knows about Jumanji. There have been plenty of movies at this point made by it. And he also wrote the sequel to it, Zathura, which it's really interesting on how he wrote Zathura, because originally Jumanji's sequel was meant to be Jumanji being played in the White House.
Oh.
Yeah, and Chris Van Allsburg was like, this idea is stupid. No one will like it.
It does sound like a very, like, movie sequel type thing. We'll put
it
in the White House now.
Yeah. Certainly. And so the production company was like, well, then give us a better idea. And he's like, I got you. So he wrote Zathura in like a fervor, desperately trying to convince the movie production company to make a better sequel. And that's how we got Josh Hutcherson.
I will say, I think I'm in the minority, but I like Zathura better than Jumanji as a book.
It's more
one of
fun.
My favorites of his. Zathura's like top 2 for me.
Yeah, I just think like with the scene of the rhinos running through the kitchen and everything, like there's just a lot more memories that I have associated with Jumanji than I do with Zathura. But
I like the movie better, the original Jumanji movie.
With Robin Williams.
Yes. I mean, no offense to, who was it? Dwayne
Jack
Johnson.
Black, Dwayne The Rock Johnson. Yeah,
I'm sure it's lovely. But like, the classic, but Zathura, the book, is one of my favorites.
Yeah, and they actually have like an actual board game of Jumanji that you can buy and play. I have played it. No, don't worry. No rhinos were summoned in the making of this board game.
Well, then that sounds
good. But I have played it, or I have watched people play it, and I came in like midway through the game, and it looked very enjoyable. Going to Polar Express, probably his most beloved book, it made me cry so much because I was like, I always want to hear the bell at the end. And as someone who can probably no longer hear the bell, I mean, I'm at peace with it. It's just such a really good, like, never grow up, it's a trap book. And it is indeed a trap growing up. So that's them. I remember, speaking of Polar Express, there was one time where I had a gift card for Books A Million. And one of the hardest decisions of my life was to purchase either one Polar Express or like this many other books that I could have gotten. And unfortunately, The other books, not necessarily, unfortunately, but the other books beat it out because it was like quantity over quality.
I would like to know how old you were when this dilemma took place.
Like, age appropriately. I wasn't like 13 or anything. Probably like 7 or 8.
Okay.
I'd be willing to bet.
Were you like 25?
No.
Because I could see it, I'm going to be honest. I've been to Books A Million.
Yeah, I could definitely see me having that dilemma even today.
Yeah.
But
it's your job now, so it's a little less.
Certainly. Well, I think I've also, through some type of avenue, gotten a copy of Polar Express. I'll have to check whenever I get back home, and there will be no follow-up. I am sorry. But he helped greatly enhance children's imaginations. That was definitely one of the things that he really wanted to focus on. One of the ways that he did this was with his book, The Chronicles of Harris Burdick, which is amazing, and I have used it as a story time. Our library system at Rapides Parish does not have it, but use our loan system and check it out because I highly recommend it. What it is it is a series of pictures, all drawn by Harris Burdick. And Harris Burdick presented this to a publisher, and each picture has a title and has a caption that goes with it. And they're wonderful writing prompts. You know, teachers have used them as writing prompts in many of their English classes. And he has gotten like bushels and bushels of, because that's how mail comes nowadays, bushels.
By the bushel.
And he's gotten so many of these stories named after the writing prompts. And also they have come out with an edition where like famous authors such as Lemony Snicket and Chris Van Allsburg's written one, and other authors have actually written their own stories. So that was really interesting for the pictures. He has won multiple awards. He got the Caldecott Honor for Garden of Abdul Ghazazi. And he got the Caldecott Medal for Jumanji and Polar Express. And other awards that include Parents' Choice Awards and a nomination for the Hans Christian Andersen Award. Besides Polar Express and Jumanji, probably my main introduction to Chris Van Allsburg, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it, is his covers of the Chronicles of Narnia. Yeah. I remember, and I can give you a specific date for this one. I was in 4th grade and checked out the Chronicles of Narnia, not a specific date, but age, whatever. And I checked out the Chronicles of Narnia, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and his cover, I just stare at it. It was gorgeous. And unfortunately, from what I know, those editions are out of publication, which breaks my heart. But yeah, those are my personal definitive versions of the Chronicles of Narnia. And I have seen, going back to Harris Burdick, I've seen an interview with him and Lemony Snicket and Mac Barnett, and he works so hard at keeping the illusion of Harris Burdick that he is not Harris Burdick, because it is very easy to assume that Chris Van Allsburg illustrated the works or the paintings, and he is very adamant that Harris Burdick is his own person. So if you want to explore more about Chris Van Allsburg, I'd greatly recommend the interview that he has with Lemony Snicket, and also Daniel Handler is Lemony Snicket's personal name, not non-pseudonym, and Mac Barnett, which is with the San Francisco Public Library. And there are also interviews with him from the Nashville Public Library, And the one with Lemony Snicket, I keep going back to it because it is so funny. Like Daniel Handler is such a just humorous person, and Chris Van Allsburg and Mac Barnett really sort of resonate with that humor.
Good. I will
and
say,
echo.
of all the things we've done on the podcast, that was the first video you actually had me watch parts of because it was so good to watch. Like, normally I kind of research my author, he researches his, and we don't commingle too much the videos we've watched. That one, he was like, you gotta watch some of this.
Definitely. And I mean, it's an hour and a half. I did not make her watch all of it.
But it was funny. It was funny.
And I appreciate that you enjoyed it. Yes. But yeah, there are definitely snippets of gold throughout it. That being said, Chris Van Allsburg has beautiful artwork, amazing shading, and intriguing stories. And he says that in his art, and this is a quote, "The effort isn't to create something utopian, but possibly just something more interesting." And Jumanji fell. Thank you very much. Yeah, so I think that that's just really interesting because he's not trying to create this perfect world. He's just trying to create something that's a bit more fantastical. And that's what I have about Chris Van Allsburg.
I will say I love Chris Van Allsburg. I love the detail in his art.
Yes.
It's particularly like his pencil drawings, like in Jumanji. But yeah, I will say for teachers and parents, for not all, but for a lot of Chris Van Allsburg's books, if you're going to do it as a read aloud, it's not for, like, say, a kindergarten read aloud. It's for older children. There's some length to those books.
Definitely.
So yeah, it's a great story time for, say, second grade, but it's not for your preschool story time. So just be aware. I know people think Polar Express, kids love the movie, let's read it. That's a sludge for a preschooler. So just be aware. And I know that's always a tough line. People think if a book's great, it's great for story time. Not always. But yeah, these are great read alouds for your older kids. And another thing that's great read alouds for older kiddos is, Beverly Cleary's books. Yes. I remember my daughter, one of her teachers read one of the Ramona books, like a chapter a day kind of thing. And I think it was Ramona and Beezus, but Beezus and Ramona, yeah. But she loved it. They're really good, read a chapter a day kind of books. Yeah. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Beverly Cleary. She is just classic American author. I love her so much. So yeah, she was born April 12th, 1916 in McMinnville, Oregon. She died March 25th, 2021 in Carmel by the Sea, California. So yeah, she died, I want to say, just a few days shy of her 105th birthday.
Wow.
Yeah, she was very close to turning 105.
Yeah, I did not do the math, so I didn't
know. She was 104 when she passed away, but very close to that birthday. Yeah, about a month. So yes, Beverly Cleary was an only child. She grew up in her younger childhood on a farm. They were in Yamville, Oregon. Now that town was so small that there was not a public library. But her mother, who believed in the importance of books, had a deal with the state library. The books would get sent to her, and she kind of acted as librarian for the locals. Like, she would check the things out to them. So from a young age, books were important to her. She knew, hey, reading's important. When she was 6, they moved to Portland, and that was a big leap from her, from farm life to Portland. City life was different for her, but her dad got a job at a bank. So, and when she got to school there, she loved books, but she struggled to read. And this is a quote from her. She said, "The first grade was sorted into 3 reading groups: bluebirds, redbirds, and blackbirds. I was a blackbird. To be a blackbird was to be disgraced. I wanted to read, but somehow I could not." So she loved books, but reading was hard for her. Like, learning to read was a challenge. And that's, she knew the importance and she loved it, but she struggled.
Was it because of, like, dyslexia or something similar?
There wasn't ever, like, a diagnosis of any particular reading disorder or learning disorder. To be fair, in that time period, I don't know that there would have been anyway. But, I experienced that to some extent with my daughter, who loves to read now and was read to from the time she was in the womb. Learning to read was hard for her. And it was upsetting to her because she knew how important books were and how big a part of our life were. But she struggled in the learning to read process, too. And as a librarian, I was like, what did I do? It was tough, but it's tougher for some kids than others. But yeah, I mean, as she got, her reading did start to improve. But she liked books, but she started to get really bored with books. She was like, everything I'm reading is really predictable, and I don't relate to this. So as a kid, she was like, I'm kind of over it. I learned how to do it, but when she was in 3rd grade, she said she read The Dutch Twins by Lucy Finch Perkins, and she loved that book because it was just about ordinary kids. Like, she felt like she could absolutely be in that world. It was kids just like her, and they were just living their lives. Normal things were happening, like would in her life. It was funny, but just ordinary slice of life, kind of. And that is when she just fell in love with reading for the first time, like personally. So from then on, she was just in the library all the time, reading. When she was in 6th grade, her teacher recommended that she write children's books based on the essays that she'd written in class. She was like, these are so good, and these would make good books. You should be a children's author when you grow up. And from that point on, she was like, okay. That is what she wanted to do. So she got her BA in English from University of California, Berkeley. She actually worked through college as a seamstress and a chambermaid. She did not have a lot of money. And then she got her 2nd bachelor's. She graduated from the School of Librarianship at the University of Washington. So I think there was a little bit of a different setup at that time. But she got, like, as far as librarian education, we don't have schools of librarianship now per se. And bachelor's in library is not real common anymore. Anyway, but she took a year-long position as a children's librarian right after that in Yakima, Washington. And she did say that a large amount of her characters and the stories in her books come from that year and things she experienced and heard from the kids and saw from the kids. That is where so much of her material came from, that year of being a children's librarian. But yeah, she said when she was a children's librarian too, the kids would ask her for books, and she felt like there weren't enough books to make recommendations. And that's another thing that made her think, well, then I need to write them. Like, she was recommending books to kids, but then she'd run out of the ones she thought they would enjoy. And so it really made her be like, this is something I need to do. She met her husband at a school dance, Clarence, at a college at a school dance. Her parents did not approve of him. He was Catholic and she was Presbyterian. Oh, okay. And so they eloped in 1940. And in 1955, they had twins, Malcolm and Mary Ann. So those were her 2 children. And it was funny. She wrote her first book in 1950, which was Henry Huggins. It was the first in the Henry series. You see Henry here. This one makes me happy because it's one of the originals. This is Henry and Risby from 1954. You can see the difference in the artwork. This is one of the newer Henrys, yeah. But I love that this is an original, and we still have it at the library. But yeah, she wrote that before she had her kids, and her publisher really wanted her to write a book about a child in kindergarten. Mm-hmm. And she was like, well, I didn't go to kindergarten. And she really liked to write from her experiences. And so it wasn't until after she had her twins and they experienced that she felt comfortable writing. So that's when we got into the Ramona and Beezus series. But if you look at the Henry and Risby, this whole series, Ramona and Beezus were his neighbors. So all these characters were in that first book. Henry Huggins, not all of them, but a lot of them. Then Ramona and Beezus became a separate, we focused on that series in 1955. They're
all sort of in the same universe.
Yes.
Okay.
Now we get into some others that aren't, Mouse and the Motorcycle, things like that. That's not exactly the same. Mitch and Amy, we have Muggy Maggie. Those are not in that same world, but a lot of her main characters we know, Ramona, Beezus, Risby, Henry, they all live in that same universe. Yeah. So, that was her first book. The first one about the Quimby sisters was in 1955. That was Beezus and Ramona. In total, she wrote 49 books. Wow. And sold over 21 million copies. And I could not find how many languages, but it was a lot of languages. There were differing numbers. Yeah, sure. They were published in a lot of different languages. Awards for Beverly Cleary. She won a Newbery Medal. The ALA Laura Ingalls Wilder Medal. She got the National Book Award. She was named a living legend by the Library of Congress. Yeah. She won the Los Angeles Times Robert Kirsch Award, which is interesting because she was the first children's book author. That's a just overall writing award, not always an author, and had never been a children's author. Mm-hmm. So she won that, which was really exciting. She got a National Medal of Art from the National Endowment for the Humanities. There we But of all her awards, and there were many, many more, she was most proud of her 35 statewide awards that were voted on by children and her readers.
Yeah.
She won 35 of those, and that was her pride and joy as far as awards went. But yeah, I love her books. They're very, like I said, slice of life. She was very respectful of her characters. The books are funny, but they're never at her character's expense. Like, she's very respectful of Beezus and Ramona and Henry and what they're experiencing and how they're living it. And, you know, they go through things, they're confused, and a lot of times they're confused about adults. Like, that's a very common theme. Like, I don't get what these grown-ups are thinking. Yeah. What are they doing? But I think her books, I would say, are best read when you're at the age of these characters. So around 8, around 9. She just wanted to write books about the world that we live in, and that felt like I could go to school with Ramona or Beezus. I could live on that street with Henry and Ramona. Like, she wanted books that just felt real, but funny and entertaining. And she was funny, but in like a really sophisticated way, almost to the point of satire. And that's why I think adults still like her books. But they're so relatable to kids. They are classics. I mean, I loved the Ramona books growing up, and they were very like just some of the first books I fell in love with.
Yeah, I have only, confession, read one Beverly Cleary book.
Ooh, what was it?
It was A Dog Gets a Bath in it. I'm not entirely sure. It was like a white dog with black specks, I'm wanting to say.
All right.
And
I thought it was going to be one of the mouse motorcycle books. Or like Runaway Ralph. Or
like, 30 minutes ago, I would have sworn up and down it was a book about a mouse. But then I was like, nope, it was The Dog Took the Bath. And
I'm looking at her list of titles because I'm like, I'm not sure. It may be. I haven't read them all. Is it Risby? I mean, Risby's a dog.
I think it was Ribsy. Yeah. And I remember getting it from Walden Books, which again is going to date me. But and then flipping through the table of contents.
No things for children here. Just so you're aware.
But I remember flipping to the table of contents and seeing that there were only like 3 chapters and like panicking and being like, Mom, this book only has 3 chapters. And she was like, oh yeah, that's just how grown-up books are. I have read many grown-up books, and that is not what they are like. So, and like every now and then, whenever I flip and I see the number of chapters, I sort of go back to that moment.
I'm a short chapter girly. Like, I feel like I'm accomplishing a lot when I finish a chapter. So books with short chapters just like
Horse changed my life.
What? I'm just like, look at me go 25 chapters in. I just feel like I am living my best life when I read the chapters quickly. So
definitely. I felt really powerful whenever I borrowed one of my classmates' chapter book holes and read like 5 chapters in one recess period.
And part of it is because I'm such a loser. I tend to, not so much now because I'm just reading for fun, but when I was reading books like for class or, for school, I mentally reward myself in that when you get to the end of this chapter, you can get up and get a snack. Or when you get to the end of this chapter, you can take a break or whatever. Like, I used to have to trick myself a lot to make myself do things. I still do that sometimes. So the short chapters are like, it's nighttime, we're so quick. I still to this day, if I don't like to exercise. And so I get one audiobook. I haven't done it in a little while, but I get one audiobook that I only let myself listen to if I'm exercising or walking. Yeah. And I will not allow myself to listen to it otherwise. I'm like, if you want to know what happens next, you're going to get up and
And read a thriller with it or something, because I know you love thrillers.
No, but yeah. So I think I like that there's the Ramona series is, I mean, anyone can read her books, but if you want to relate to it more, I mean, as a young girl, I related to it, but you would have probably loved Henry's series. But I love her books. And someone asked her, we all have a favorite. I mean, I loved probably all the Ramona books, but Beezus and Ramona was probably my favorite because it's the first one I remember. But what her favorite book was, and her quote was, "Does your mother have a favorite child?" Like, she just loved them all like her babies. She couldn't choose.
How did you, or have you seen the Selena Gomez Ramona?
I have, yeah.
movie?
I was fine with it. I think it was a good adaptation. It was pretty true to the book.
Okay.
Because I can get real upset with
a
book I love when they make a garbage movie or change too much. But no, I think it was good. I think it was
Gotcha.
Yeah, so we've been doing a lot of, last month I did Judy Blume, and I still haven't seen that new movie yet, but
friends and I thought about it, and then we were like, oh look, Guardians of the Galaxy 3 is playing.
You go see, or either got to see Margaret without me. We're done.
I have a very difficult time imagining that happening.
Just saying, lie to me if you do. But yeah.
Amen.
So I do. I love her. She is just like, to me, like classic Americana author. She just loved books, loved children, loved the world that she was writing about. And she was a librarian who believed strongly in getting good books in the hands of kids. And, she learned that from her mother. But, man, she lived to 104. Like,
yeah, that's crazy.
She's just like,
and like 104.95.
Right.
Too.
Yeah. When I just think of classic children's authors, like, I can't imagine how many kids that Beverly Cleary was a person that made them fall in love with books. Like, I just love her so much.
Yeah, you really do just got to think of Bev and Judy.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So those are authors for this month. So if you're new to the podcast, we always kind of announce who we'll be talking about for next month. And we flip-flop. So since Craig did a picture book author this month, I'll do that. He'll take a chapter book author. So we're going into June. So my pick for June will be Maurice Sendak.
And mine will be Richard Peck. I am really excited for Maurice Sendak. I really enjoy his work. And I'm also really looking forward to Richard Peck.
It's going to be a good one. We more than likely will have a guest with us next month, but we don't have 100% confirmation, so that'll be a surprise for y'all, just like us. Yeah, we do think we'll have a local author to come for June for her book as well. So fingers crossed that works out.
Indeed.
But yeah, thanks so much for watching, and we hope to see you guys next month. Keep reading.